Hi all. Today we are continuing our lesson 4 of our Angular tutorial series, Angular Directives. I am Sachitra Giganage. Let's continue our lesson 4. Directives are classes that add additional behaviors to elements in our applications. With Angular built-in directives, you can manage functionalities, styles and themes. When we consider about directives, mainly there is three type of directives. Components. We learn about component and directive with template called components. These are the most common directives in Angular framework. And second type is attribute directives. This directive used to change the appearance or the behavior of the element, component or other directive. And the third type of directive is structural directives. These directives change the DOM layout by adding and removing DOM elements. For example, you may remember we do some DOM operations to add element to DOM using ng4. In that case, ng4 is a structural directive. Next, we will discuss about built-in attribute directives. Built-in attribute directives. Attribute directive listen to and modify the behavior of other HTML element and attributes and properties and components. For example, we talk about ng class, ng style and ng module. When we talk about ng class basically used for add or remove classes from elements using conditional expressions. Let's see how to use ng class. What I am going to do is change my item card label. If the available item count is less than 40, I am going to change my card label. All of changes I am going to do in my item card component. First of all, in item card component CSS, I will add my new class called highlight label. In that class, I will set my font weight to 400 and also as font color to green color, where we define the green color in variable in root style sheet. Let's see how to use ng class attribute directive to bind CSS class to our elements. So what I am going to do is, if my items available count is less than 40, I am going to add this highlight label class using a conditional expression. So I am checking item dot available class count is less than 40. If this condition is true, I will add the class in true section, which is highlighted label, and otherwise I will put it as empty. So now let's save our application and see whether our changes are appears. Oops, something wrong. I think class is not added to my label. What is the problem? Yes, issue is that element where I at the ng class is wrong. It should add to the label of item card which is in h3 tags. After fixing it, let's see the result. You can see that last item card header changed to green color. That is how we use ng class attribute to change classes dynamically. Okay, what we have done is we added the class highlight label and um, template. I set the item class as item availability is less than 40. I add the true condition. I mentioned the our class highlight label. So let's see what happens there. Okay, now you can see the available count is 10 in this strawberry ice cream light. So that header came to green color. That is how we add class dynamically using this built-in attribute. And we can also use this ng class with the method also. Let's see how we can do this part. Okay, now we are going to look into some use cases of using ng class attribute directive with some methods. So what I'm going to do is simply add some classes. This buy button, available items count is below than 40. I will disable this button. Allow. Let's see how to do it with Angular. Okay. First of all, what I had to do is I had to define a variable classes evalue pair evalue pair sets for the keep the class name some objects. So my I'll name it as button class and this set I define friend double or not the object, and then I have to add some classes. Before I'll write function as set button classes, and function I'm going to set this uh, button classes set. I won't say button class. Currently it's a empty object, so I define this object as first the is my class name. I will add the button disable, and then how I going to disable the button by button class. The available count is below than 40. So this dot item dot count 40. I'll add my is true button disable is true. So can add more classes if we want. For example, use but well well false false but the enable class will appears. How but we have to add this to ng class. So what I can do is the class of this would field class, but you can you notice that I didn't execute that function in set button classes. I want to set this button classes if when the constructor runs. So I will constructor. Let's see what will happen. It's rendering cannot read property available count of undefined. available count of undefined means that this dot item undefined at this that means constructor runs before this item value bind to the item variable. So that is the problem here. So what we can do is using the Angular lifecycle hook. So when recording this tutorial series, I'll keep Angular lifecycle hooks for later state, but I'll record it and put it in before this tutorial when we publish in the tutorial. So now I'm going to teach you how to use that Angular lifecycle hook, which is on change. Lifecycle hook that is called when any data bound property of directive change define an on changes method to handle the changes. So we can extend our class implementing ng on it, and also I want to implement on change. So after implementing the on change, we have to define that class. That's why this shows as some error. States the class item card component currently implement interface change property ng on change is missing. So this is the required thing, and this is the what we going to use here. G on change, and it's after implementing this, you can see that error. What happens is there is when something bind to variables of this component or some data bound property of a directive changes, this life cycle hook will trigger. So this has some parameter type simple changes. Yes, and can check whether this simple changes appears here. So before going forward, I will show you by logging this parameter. I will add it yes. So when after we save our application, first I will comment out this since this is some error. Look, okay. Now you can see that the changes is appear. There's four changes. So there since there is a 4 instance in our item card. So you can see that simple changes object contains the property, and that property contains current value. See, it's the first change. This is true because we are not change this for initial change, and if there is a initial any other changes, previous change previous value also mentioned in this object. So what we have to do is this item and current value is not null or not undefined, can simply set our classes. So what I'm going to do is that so I check if changes dot item. So if changes dot item is available or not available, we will run set button classes rather than from constructor. Move comments, run the see what will happen. So nothing happens. Yes. Okay. The problem is you can see that maybe class may added, but the problem is these classes we have not defined it. So I will define those classes here. Joining class. So what I want is when the button is disabled, I want to set its color to some gray color, and when the background color also to be some light gray, and border also pixel solid one. And while disabling, I want to prevent all events, click in events, so I point event set to none. Okay, and that's what I want to do. And now save this thing and let's see what will happen to our Angular application. Okay, you can see that here available count is 10, so this button should be disabled and it is disabled. Okay, you can see that any of the event is not triggering with this button. Okay, the next thing is I also added some button enable class. You can try it by yourself. I will show as an example. However, let's say if you're going to add the background color is to green and color to dark blue. Let's say you can see now we have to set white. Okay, now you can see that available button also enabled with that things, and I'll set this cursor as pointer. So now it is beautiful. You can see pointer is appearing here, and since this available count is 10, it's below than 40 and it's disabled. So what we learned is so far adding ng class built-in attribute our using methods. Okay, now we used see examples how ng class add or remove css classes in single line expression and also with methods. Now we see about ng styles. Ng styles also are same. We are using that also for style our Angular application components. Okay, now what I'm going to do is uh, show you how to use ng style attribute directive. For that, what I'm going to do is if the available item count is less than 40, I will highlight this count with ng style. So let's see how we can do it. To our code, and in my item card component template, I am going to use this ng style things with method also. So I will go to my component and I will define in the variable available count highlight, and it's also a record object with string and string. Here we use a boolean, but now we are using a string. You can see why we use such a thing. So after that set button classes, I will create another method here, set text styles. Now I'm setting these things, this dot, uh, what called available count highlight, the available count style. That I change this variable since that variable name is too long. You can compile it and run it, but anyway, using meaningful short variable name is better. So what I'm going to do is here is set the font weight. Okay, now in here we in our object I use as string and string object. So that's why we do such a thing is we are setting up here after. In previous example we setting it here the object contain string and boolean, but in this styles not a boolean but the string value by checking the condition. So I'm going to change less than 49, going to font weight to bold, and it is otherwise it's normal. And I want to set font size little bit higher. No, that's enough for now. Okay, now I have added my function and I want to call the function from as the same. In the if item is set, here I will call set text styles function, and text style function will call after ng change triggers. I remove this console value, and now we have to do is the bind the ng style attribute value as available count style. So how can we do is you can guess it now as we do in our previous example here, and I'm going to add the now attribute is ng style, and our object value is available count style. Now I save the things and let's go there. You can see my font weight is here getting bold. So that's how we use Angular ng style attribute, inbuilt attribute. And let's see our presentation and what is next. Then it's about ng model. I would like to give it to you, try it, and we will discuss this thing in our later lesson in Angular forms. Discussing there is would be better. And now we are looking into building structural directives. As we discussed, structural directives are responsible for HTML layout. They sharp or reface the DOM structure, typically by adding, removing, and manipulating the host element to which they are attached. For example, if you remember, we use ng4 before to repeat the node for each item in a list. And now we are going to see about ng if. This is a built-in uh, structural directive for conditionally create or dispose a subview from template. Let's move to our source code. So what I'm going to do here is this is our Angular application in the current state. What I'm going to do is add a tag and tag value to show that item quantity is going low and indicate the customer to if you want to hurry to get these things before it finish. So I'm going to add a red tag here, mentioning that quantity is low. So for since it is a conditional tag, I want to appears that tag only if the available item count is below than 40. So let's see the code to see what we can do. Okay, I'm here now. I want to add a tag in this space. Yes, I will add tag as span, uh, class as tag, as the content of tag law quantity. Okay, now I have created some styles. I will paste them there. You can see I paste in there. This is the tag styles if you wanted to see how the tag is styled. So I will hold the cursor for some extent. You can pause it and see the video. This is for the uh, sharpen edges, and this is how I styled this. Okay, let's see. Yeah, if you see now, you can see all items show it as a low quantity, but conditionally what I want is if the available item count is below 40, show this low quantity tag. Okay, how can we do it? We can do it using the ngIf structural directive. So in my code, I have what I have to do is add a ngIf and the condition. If this condition is true, Angular will add this element to the DOM. Otherwise, it removes the element from the DOM and also the sub element of this main element. But there is no sub element. Let's see how we can do it. Item.available count should be lesser than 40 to see that tag. Okay, I added the condition. Let's see how it works. Okay, fine. You can see now if item quantity is below than 40, it shows low quantity. That indicates the user, that is you have to buy it quickly. Okay, now we see how to use the ngIf structural directives, and also we have another structural directive called ng4. As here we have discussed ng4, and if you are not remember, I will go through the code and show you how to use it. Whether we discussed ng4 structural directive previously, I would like to go through this process again. So for better understanding, I will cut this ng4 syntax and paste it above and comment it. Okay. Now what happens is when ng4 is running, first Angular takes this item list array and store each item in the items array in a local item looping variable. That is what the first thing Angular doing. Then Angular translate this let item of item list into some kind of Angular templating mechanism and repeat this block for each item in the list. If there is 3 items in list, repeat this to 3 items, 3 blocks of HTML. Then Angular makes sure each item is accessible from each of the HTML block. You can see this when we go to the inspect element of our browser. I will replace these things as we were before and save it. Let's go to the browser. If you came to the browser, it is the best part of the learning thing is working with this inspect element. You can learn more and more things using this element tool. Now you can see here is my main area identified by a main area class which is in our app component, and you can see there is few divs with class item. There's 4 divs, but if you go to our code, only what we have added is one div. Then how there is a 4 views? That's because ng4 iterates and create multiple blocks according to size of this item list. As I described, then each item is accessible from each list. That's how ng4 is working. Now sometimes when you are iterating through these kind of HTML blocks, you may want to get the index of this HTML block. For example, if you want to do some operations over the index, or whether it is even or odd, or in some cases you may want to do some special things in your first element in repeating block, you definitely need the index. So how can we get the index of this iterative block? That is, we can add a semicolon here and put let I equals index. Then Angular assign index value of this iterative HTML block to this element I. For example, I have added it like this, and I will put some h1 tag here to show you. I will add I. This is interpolation mark, and I will print here I. See what you can see, there is we have added the index here. So if there's any, in case we have to use that index, we can get those numbers like this. Okay, now next topic is ng switch. As we discussed in our example list, ng switch is a set of directive that which among alternative views. So if you have 2 views which have conditionally you have to show those things, we can use ng switch as the switch case syntax in JavaScript programming. We can use this. So I will go to that example now. To show you how to work with ng switch, I will get a simple example. What I want to do is I will add a div here and another div here, and I paste my existing code to first div, and in the second div I will add this iteration again, and just add in some spans to show item dot label. So what I did is I have added another div to iterate through the list, and each iteration it shows the label of the items. If you go to our code, you can see that my new list also appears there. What I want is, if in some cases I'm going to add the switch syntax here. If switch value is list, it should show the list. If switch value is grid, it should show this grid view as previous. So how can we do that? First of all, we can bind uh, ng switch structural directive value, and we are going to get the value of variable uh, view type. Now, as we use in the switch case in JavaScript, there are also another structural directive which is called ng switch case. For that, I will add a case called is grid, and here I add list. Now, is view type if is grid, only this case is execute, and ng switch case will add elements to DOM. And if the view type is list, this ng switch structure directive will add these elements to DOM. So before we move in, we have not defined view type variable in app component. So I go to app component and say string. I set this value as list. Let's save and see what will happen. It shows can't bind ng switch case since it is known property of div. Most probably this name, yeah, there's a typo. In ng switch, there's additional h here. Let's save. Okay, now you can see that list view is appears there. So if we change our switch variable value to grid, you can see grid will appears here. So that's how Angular switch case thing works. Okay, so far we learned about directives. We learned about attribute directives, structural directives, and we learned that components are also a directive. So now in all our example, what we did was using the default directive which is introduced by Angular. But can my problem is, can we create our own directive? So since a component is a directive, we created our own components. That is possible to create directive. I mean creating custom attribute directives. The answer is yes, we can create custom attribute directives. So now we are going to create a custom attribute directive. So in my source code, I'm going to add a separate folder here for my directives. Since I'm going to use this directive all over the application, I using this in a global place. In this directive, I will create my file. Let's say highlight directive. Highlight directive.ts. Now my file is created. If you can remember, when we creating component manually, we had to use decorator called component, and we had to import them, and also while we creating in directives, that is also same. So import directive from where this directive is in our uh, core module. So I import it from core module. Okay. Now what we have to do is I have to set the directive decorator. As we learned in components, there's a property called selector. Selector used to name the our directive. So my selector name is, I would like to add name like app highlight. Now my directive is created. Then I have to add my class. I add class import class highlight directive. Okay, now my class also added. What I want to do is whenever this attribute directive is available in some text or somewhere, I want to highlight that element background with some color. So for that I have to add the access the that DOM element. We have we can use element ref, which is the to access DOM element we can use element ref. We have to import it also from Angular core module, and using element ref we can access our DOM element. For that in constructor I pass like that. This element ref is a wrapper around native element inside of view, and element ref is backed by render specific element in the browser. This is usually a DOM element. So what we can do is using this element ref we can access our native element. So I'm going to access it element ref dot native element dot, then I want to set the styles, then I want to set the background of my style and I'll set it as red. Now my directive, I have created my directive, but before using this directive, as we created in components, as we discussed in components, we have to declare this directive class in our module. So since I'm going to use this directory in all over my application, I will add it to my app module. So in declarations, we have to add the directive also. Then import it. Okay. Now my highlight directive, which is my highlighter attribute, is ready to use. Now we see in item card, if I want to highlight something, what I have to do is get this selector value as an attribute and put it in where I want. So I will add it to my description for now. I add the attribute here and save it. Let's see what happens. You can see my values are descriptions are highlighted. That is how this attributes works. Now we created attribute manually, and you can understand using this type of attributes we can use in several ways. And furthermore, if you want to if you don't understand how I access these styles and things, you what you have to do is just console these things and see how those properties are structured, and furthermore read about these term documentation. Now you can see how this is taken. In element ref you can see that there's a native element, and in their styles, and in the styles we can configure these values as we want. So there is a lot of things to learn. You can do it by yourself and learn those things. Okay, now we will conclude our lesson 4 from here about directives. We learned a lot about directives. In next lesson we will learn about Angular services, Angular pipes, and how to make how to do a dependency injection. Thank you.